I mentioned earlier that conflict is a process, and we know a lot about this process. Here's one of the many models that attempt to explain the process of conflict. This one starts with stage 1, where the conditions that are right for conflict begin to emerge. Not the conflict itself, but the conditions that are right for conflict. Once people perceive and experience a conflict in stage 2, they prepare to respond with one of several different intentions in stage 3. In many cases, these intentions are translated into behavior in stage 4, and the outcomes of the conflict process appear in stage 5. So let's take a quick look at each one of these stages for a better understanding of the factors that you need to consider when you're trying to manage any conflict. The conflict process usually begins when the conditions that are necessary for conflict surface. These conditions are usually related to communication, structure, and personal variables. If the conditions related to these variables negatively affect something that one party cares about, then the potential for conflict becomes what we call actualized in the second stage. Conditions come first. If those conditions set a perfect storm, then in stage 2, the conflict becomes apparent to the group members. Actualization then requires that one or more parties perceive or experience the conflict. How do these conditions then lead to conflict? Communication conditions include communication barriers, the ones we learned about a few lectures ago. Things like misunderstanding the meanings of words, not sending enough information through a communication channel, and paying too much attention to noise and distractions. These things are not conflicts in and of themselves. Instead, these things create the conditions that allow disagreements to surface. Structural conditions can also lead to conflict. Things like the size of the group, the dependency between group members, the features of the task, and the clarity of who is to work on the task and who makes decisions about the task matters. Structural conditions also include the degree of compatibility between individuals' interests and the group's interests. The leader's approach matters, and the way behaviors are rewarded can lead to conflict. If we expect people to collaborate, but we reward individual performance, this structural condition might lead people to compete instead of work together. We all know that there are personal variables that might contribute to conflict. We've covered values, personality, and emotions in this class, and we've learned how these qualities impact our behavior. So people who score high in traits like disagreeableness, neuroticism, these people are more likely to be involved in conflict. Together, all 3 of these conditions create the potential for opposition or incompatibility. Sometimes then this potential is actualized, which leads us to the second stage of the process. When one or more parties recognize that a disagreement exists, they are said to perceive it. But the perception of conflict is not the same thing as being affected by it. Conflict is felt when it is personally experienced, when one party experiences the tension or the frustration that usually goes along with conflict. The perception and personalization of conflict is important because these processes impact how people define a conflict. How people define a conflict then impacts how they react to and deal with it. Once a conflict has emerged and people are aware that it exists, they begin to formulate a plan for dealing with it. These plans are what we call intentions, decisions about how to behave in a specific situation. Some researchers divide these intentions into 2 categories. Cooperative intentions are plans to work with the other party and satisfy their interests. You can be high or low on this dimension, and then you can be high or low on assertiveness, the degree to which you plan to satisfy your own interests. Now, if you place these 2 dimensions along the X and Y axes, you get 5 conflict handling intentions. Competition is high on assertiveness and low on cooperativeness. Someone who's competing is thinking about their own interests, their own opinion, their own wants, desires, needs in a particular situation. The intention to avoid simply means that you withdraw from the conflict, you suppress the conflict, you reduce the significance of the conflict. Accommodation is more cooperative than it is assertive. Accommodation means giving up your own interests for the other party. You give the other party more than you get. Supporting someone else's opinion, despite your reservations about it, might be an example of accommodating. With compromising, there is no clear winner or loser. There's a willingness to ration the object of the conflict and accept a solution that maybe doesn't make every party as happy as they could be, but at least it gets an agreement in place. The fifth type of intention is called collaboration, and it is high on assertiveness and high on cooperativeness. So with collaboration, you're both trying to satisfy the other party's needs and satisfy your own needs. You're trying to do both at the same time. People with a collaborative intention want to work with the other party to find a solution that works for everyone. Together, these 5 different intentions are important to the conflict process for a few reasons. First, intentions intervene between our perceptions and our behavior. Every moment of our lives, we perceive the environment, sometimes accurately, sometimes inaccurately. Our intentions, our decisions, our plans impact how those perceptions turn into behaviors. So think about this. You perceive a sink full of dirty dishes, but your intentions are to relax for the evening. These intentions then may prevent you from actually washing those dishes and lead you straight to the couch. Second, understanding the other party's intentions can help us respond to their behavior. Has anyone ever said something insensitive to you, but with good intentions? They weren't trying to hurt you, but they did. Knowing their intentions prevents an unnecessary conflict from surfacing. Third, although intentions are usually translated into behavior, the behavior doesn't always match the original intentions. You may intend to relax, but go ahead and wash the dishes anyway. In stage 4, intentions become behavior, and the conflict becomes visible, not just perceived or felt. It isn't until stage 4 that people outside the conflict might notice a conflict exists. Remember this when an employee or a friend comes to you with a conflict. The process started long before you arrived on the scene, and the context is important to the resolution process. We can use any one of the 5 conflict handling styles to manage conflict. These styles match the 5 intentions we learned about earlier. Here is a list of some of these conflict management techniques that we might use to resolve dysfunctional conflict and stimulate functional conflict. I want to point out 3 of them. Some conflicts happen because there aren't enough resources to go around, and people have to compete for their share of the pie. This competition then creates the conditions that are necessary for conflict to develop and emerge and be experienced by people. When this is the case, expanding those resources can help resolve the underlying conflict, which stems from competition. If we want to stimulate functional conflict, we can bring in outsiders. Their fresh perspective, their different experiences can sometimes stimulate discussion and help the group see things more realistically. One other technique I'd like to mention is appointing a devil's advocate. What this means is assigning someone in the group to purposely argue against the majority position. Whatever that majority position is, the devil's advocate is supposed to argue against that idea. If most people agree with plan A, the devil's advocate might stress the weaknesses of plan A. If most of those people then change their mind and go with plan B, the devil's advocate is once again supposed to stress the weaknesses of plan B. Their job is to get the group to think about things they aren't already thinking about. The 5th and final stage of the conflict process includes the consequences associated with the conflict. The outcomes are said to be constructive or functional when the conflict helps a group make a better decision, come up with a new idea, resolve a long-standing problem within the group, or encourage people to improve in some way. The outcomes are destructive or dysfunctional when the group members are not happy with themselves, each other, or the situation itself, when it hinders the group's performance or threatens the group's ability to survive in a specific situation.